In the dusty corner of a forgotten gas station off Highway 16 in rural Montana, an 11-year-old girl with dirt-smudged cheeks and determined eyes clutched a worn backpack containing everything she owned in the world: 3 changes of clothes, a tattered teddy bear missing one eye, and a folded photograph of a mother whose face was beginning to fade from her memory. Emma Parker had been abandoned 12 hours ago by her stepfather, who promised to return after getting cigarettes but whose taillights had long since disappeared into the vast Montana wilderness, taking with them any semblance of stability she had ever known. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The gas station attendant, Mabel Thornton, a woman with silver-streaked hair and kind eyes weathered by 67 years of Montana winters, watched the little girl through the clouded glass window. For the past 12 hours, the child had maintained her post on the cracked concrete bench outside, occasionally walking to the edge of the property to scan the horizon before returning to her sentinel position. Mabel had offered her sandwiches, hot chocolate, and a place to sit inside, but the girl had accepted only water and a single package of crackers, insisting she needed to stay where her stepfather could easily spot her when he returned. "Sweetheart," Mabel said, stepping outside as the Montana sun began to dip behind the distant mountains, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple, "I don't think he's coming back tonight. Why don't you come inside where it's warm? We can figure things out in the morning." Emma's eyes, green as the Montana pines and far too serious for a child her age, met Mabel's. "He said to wait right here. He'll be mad if I'm not here when he comes back." The slight quiver in her voice betrayed the doubt she wouldn't acknowledge aloud. Somewhere deep inside, past the layers of hope and denial, Emma knew. Just as she'd known when her mother hadn't returned from just going out for a bit 3 years ago, leaving her alone with a stepfather who viewed her as nothing more than an unwanted burden attached to the woman he'd once desired. Mabel's heart broke for the child, but she also recognized the stubborn determination in her posture. This wasn't a girl who would be easily convinced to abandon her post, regardless of how futile her vigil might be. Instead, Mabel nodded and returned inside, picking up the phone to call the county sheriff. This wasn't the first time a child had been abandoned at her gas station, the last major stop before the vast emptiness of western Montana wilderness, but that knowledge didn't make it any easier to witness. Sheriff James Miller arrived 40 minutes later, his patrol car kicking up dust as it pulled into the gravel parking lot. At 53, James had served Riverdale County for nearly 20 years, his once brown hair now salted with gray, his face lined with the stories of 1,000 small-town tragedies. He'd seen it all: domestic disputes turned deadly, hunting accidents, drunk driving fatalities, and yes, abandoned children. Each one left its mark on him, invisible scars that he carried beneath his weathered uniform. "Evening, Mabel," he said, tipping his hat as he entered the gas station. "Where's our visitor?" Mabel gestured toward the window. "Been sitting there since 6 a.m. Won't come inside except to use the bathroom. Keeps saying her stepfather's coming back for her." James nodded, his expression grim. "Did she give you a name?" "Emma. Emma Parker. Said her stepfather's name is Ray Donovan. I asked for her mother, and she just said she's gone away. Poor thing couldn't have had a proper meal all day, but she barely touched the sandwich I brought her." James sighed, recognizing the familiar pattern. "I'll run the names through the system, see what comes up. In the meantime, I'd better introduce myself." Outside, the temperature was dropping rapidly, the warm Montana day giving way to the chill that descended from the mountains after sunset. Emma had pulled her thin denim jacket tighter around her small frame, her knuckles white as she gripped the fabric. She didn't look up as James approached, her eyes fixed on the empty highway stretching into the distance. "Evening, miss," James said, keeping his voice gentle as he lowered himself onto the bench beside her, careful to maintain a respectful distance. "I'm Sheriff Miller. Mind if I sit here for a bit?" Emma glanced at him briefly, taking in the uniform, the badge, the gun holstered at his side, before returning her gaze to the highway. "He's coming back," she said firmly. "He just went to get cigarettes and some things in the next town." James nodded, not contradicting her. "That may be so. But it's getting mighty cold out here, and Mabel tells me you've been waiting since early morning. That's a long time for a cigarette run. A muscle twitched in Emma's jaw, but she remained silent, her small shoulders rigid with tension. How about this? James continued. It's my job to help people who might be in trouble. Part of that job is finding people who might be lost. Why don't you come down to the station with me, get something hot to eat, and we can try to find your stepfather. Maybe his car broke down, or he got turned around on these back roads. Happens all the time to folks who aren't from around here. For the first time, Emma turned to look at him directly, a flicker of hope in her eyes. You'd help find him? James nodded, keeping his expression neutral despite the anger simmering inside him toward a man who could abandon a child at a gas station. That's my job. But I can't do it very well if you're sitting out here getting hypothermia. What do you say we get you warmed up, and then we can start looking? The internal struggle played out across Emma's face, the desperate desire to believe her stepfather would return fighting against the growing realization that she had been abandoned once again. Finally, her shoulders sagged slightly. Okay. But if he comes back here, he won't know where I am. I'll leave a note with Mabel, James assured her. With my phone number and the address of the station. That way, if he comes back, he'll know exactly where to find you. Emma nodded slowly, gathering her backpack and standing up. Her legs wobbled slightly after sitting in the same position for so many hours. James resisted the urge to steady her, recognizing that this independent child would likely reject such help. Inside the gas station, Mabel had already written out a note with the sheriff's information. She handed it to James with a meaningful look that spoke volumes about her opinion of Emma's stepfather. I'll be closing up in a couple hours, Mabel said. But I'll make sure this is posted prominently on the door. James thanked her and guided Emma to his patrol car, opening the front passenger door rather than the back, a small gesture to show she wasn't in trouble. As they pulled away from the gas station, Emma pressed her face against the window, watching as her last connection to her previous life receded into the distance. At the sheriff's station, Deputy Lena Rodriguez was waiting with a container of homemade chicken soup and fresh rolls. At 32, Lena was the youngest deputy in the department, her kind eyes and gentle manner making her particularly effective with children and victims of trauma. She'd grown up in foster care herself, bouncing between 7 different homes before aging out of the system, giving her a unique perspective on cases like Emma's. This is my colleague, Deputy Rodriguez, James introduced. She's going to help get you settled while I make some calls. Emma eyed Lena warily, her natural distrust of adults evident in her rigid posture and guarded expression. Lena didn't push, simply placing the soup and rolls on the break room table and gesturing for Emma to sit. I bet you're hungry after sitting at that gas station all day, Lena said casually, not making it a question or demand. This soup is from Rita's Diner down the street. Best chicken soup in 3 counties, according to the sheriff. Emma hesitated, then slid into the chair, the aroma of the homemade soup apparently too tempting to resist after a day of near fasting. She ate slowly at first, then with increasing speed as her body reminded her how hungry she truly was. Lena sat quietly, not forcing conversation, allowing the child to eat in peace. Meanwhile, James was in his office, running Ray Donovan's name through the system. It didn't take long to find multiple warrants in neighboring states: possession with intent to distribute, assault, failure to appear, and most damningly, child endangerment. Emma's mother, Melissa Parker, was listed as deceased in a police report from 3 years ago, an apparent drug overdose in a motel room in Billings. Ray had been questioned but released due to lack of evidence of involvement. James sighed, rubbing his temples. The story was becoming clearer, and more heartbreaking. Emma had lost her mother 3 years ago and had been living with a stepfather with no biological connection or legal guardianship, a man now fleeing from multiple warrants. The chances of Ray Donovan voluntarily returning to claim Emma were virtually non-existent. When James returned to the break room, Emma had finished her soup and was sitting quietly, her backpack clutched protectively in her lap. She looked up as he entered, her expression guarded but expectant. "Did you find him?" she asked immediately. James sat down across from her, choosing his words carefully. Emma, I need to ask you some questions about Ray. How long has he been your stepfather? Emma's brow furrowed slightly. Since I was 7. He married my mom, but he's not my real dad. My real dad left when I was a baby. And your mom? When did you last see her? Emma's gaze dropped to her hands. 3 years ago. She went out and didn't come back. Ray said she ran away because she didn't want to be a mom anymore, but I don't believe him. My mom wouldn't leave me. The simple conviction in her voice made James's heart ache. How has Ray been taking care of you since then? Emma shrugged, her shoulders barely moving. We move around a lot. He says it's for his job, but we never stay anywhere long enough for me to finish a whole school year. Sometimes we stay in motels, sometimes in his friends' places. Yesterday he said we were going to Montana to start fresh. He seemed really nervous, kept looking in the rearview mirror like someone was following us. James exchanged a glance with Lena, the pieces falling into place. Ray had been fleeing his latest warrant, likely using back roads to avoid detection. When he stopped at the remote gas station, he'd seen an opportunity to rid himself of the child who had become an unwanted responsibility. Emma, James said gently, I need to tell you something difficult. We've found some information about Ray that suggests he might not be coming back for you. He's in some trouble with the law, and it looks like he might have left the state. Emma's expression didn't change, but her knuckles whitened as she gripped her backpack tighter. He said he was coming back, she insisted, but her voice lacked conviction. I believe that he told you that, James acknowledged. But sometimes adults don't tell the truth, especially when they're scared or in trouble. Right now, our priority is making sure you're safe and taken care of. Emma's lower lip trembled slightly before she bit down on it, clearly fighting to maintain her composure. What happens to me now? Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. For tonight, we've arranged for you to stay with a very nice foster family here in town, Lena explained, her voice gentle. They've helped other children in similar situations. Tomorrow, a social worker will come talk with you about what happens next. Emma's face paled slightly at the mention of foster care. I don't want to go with strangers. I understand that, Lena said. It's scary to go somewhere new. But Mrs. Wilson has a comfortable spare bedroom already, and her husband makes fantastic pancakes for breakfast. It's just for a short while until we figure things out. Emma didn't respond, her eyes focused on the floor, her small body radiating tension and fear. How about this, James said, an idea forming. Deputy Rodriguez will take you to meet the Wilsons and get you settled. Meanwhile, I'll keep looking for Ray, just in case there's been some misunderstanding. I have your backpack, is there anything else you need from the gas station? Emma shook her head, her expression closed and unreadable. The Wilsons' home was warm and inviting, with homemade quilts on every bed and the lingering aroma of fresh-baked cookies in the air. Martha Wilson, a retired school teacher with silver-gray hair and kind blue eyes, welcomed Emma with a gentle smile and no excessive questions or demands. She showed Emma to a small but comfortable bedroom with yellow curtains and a patchwork quilt in shades of blue and green. The bathroom is just across the hall, Martha explained. There are fresh towels on the shelf, and I put some new pajamas on the bed that should fit you. If you're still hungry, there's soup warming on the stove. Emma nodded silently, still clutching her backpack as though it contained priceless treasures rather than her few meager possessions. I know this is hard, Martha said gently. You don't know me, and everything is strange right now. You don't have to talk or eat or do anything you don't want to. Just know that you're safe here for tonight, and tomorrow we can figure out the next steps together. After Martha left, Emma sat on the edge of the bed, finally allowing the tears she'd been holding back all day to fall silently down her cheeks. Part of her had known, even as she sat waiting at the gas station, that Ray wasn't coming back. He'd been acting strange for days, jumpy and irritable, cursing whenever they passed a police car. Yesterday morning, he'd been almost kind to her, buying her a breakfast sandwich and orange juice before they hit the road, unusual generosity from a man who typically begrudged her every meal. "Just wait here, kid," he'd said at the gas station, not meeting her eyes. "I need to grab some things in the next town. Be back in an hour or so." An hour had stretched into 12, and now into forever. Emma wasn't naive. At 11, she'd already experienced more abandonment and disappointment than many adults. She'd known in her heart that Ray was gone for good the moment his car had disappeared from view, just as she'd known her mother wasn't coming back despite Ray's cruel fiction about her choosing to leave. In the tidy guest room of strangers, Emma finally allowed herself to acknowledge what she'd been denying all day: she was truly alone in the world now. No mother, no stepfather, not even the fiction of family to cling to anymore. Just herself and whatever fate the foster care system had in store for her. Miles away, in his office at the sheriff's station, James Miller was making calls to neighboring counties, trying to piece together Ray Donovan's likely escape route. The man had a 12-hour head start, which in Montana's vast wilderness could mean he was already in another state. James knew the search was largely symbolic. Ray wasn't coming back for Emma, and finding him would only result in his arrest, not a family reunion. The real question was what would happen to Emma now. As a child with no known living relatives and no legal guardian, she would enter the foster care system. At 11, her chances of adoption were statistically low. She would likely bounce between foster homes until she aged out of the system at 18, her future uncertain and her path difficult. Unless, perhaps, there was another option. James picked up the phone again, this time dialing a number he knew by heart. After 3 rings, a deep, gravelly voice answered. "Logan." "Mike, it's James. Sorry to call so late. How are you doing out there at the cabin?" Michael Logan, former Army Ranger and James's closest friend for over 30 years, grunted softly. "Same as yesterday. Trees. Mountains. Peace and quiet. Until you called." James smiled despite the serious circumstances. Mike's gruff exterior hid a heart of gold, though few people were allowed close enough to discover this fact. After 3 tours in Afghanistan and 1 in Iraq, Mike had returned to Montana 2 years ago, purchased a remote cabin in the mountains, and largely withdrawn from society. The physical wounds had healed, but the invisible ones were still raw, still bleeding. "I've got a situation here," James said, getting to the point. "Young girl, 11 years old, abandoned at Mabel's gas station by her stepfather. No relatives we can find. Mother's deceased." A long silence followed. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because she needs somewhere to go that isn't the system," James said simply. "You've got that cabin with 3 bedrooms that you're not using. You need a reason to rejoin the land of the living." Seemed like a potential solution to 2 problems. Mike's laugh was short and without humor. "You want me to take in some traumatized kid?" "James, I can barely take care of myself some days. I'm the last person who should be responsible for a child." "That's where you're wrong, Mike. You understand trauma. You understand loss. You know what it's like to have your world shattered and have to rebuild from nothing. That's exactly what this kid needs, someone who gets it, who won't feed her empty platitudes or expect her to just get over it." "I'm not qualified." "You're more qualified than most of the overworked, underpaid foster families in the system," James interrupted. "Look, I'm not asking for a lifetime commitment. Just a temporary placement while we try to find her family, if they exist. A few weeks, maybe a month or 2 at most." Mike was silent for so long that James thought he might have hung up. Finally, he sighed deeply. "Bring her out tomorrow. No promises beyond meeting her. If it's clearly not going to work, you take her back immediately. Deal?" "Deal," James agreed, relief evident in his voice. "Thanks, Mike. I owe you." "You owed me already," Mike grumbled. "Now you owe me twice." The next morning, Emma woke in the unfamiliar bedroom, momentarily disoriented before the events of the previous day came rushing back. She lay still, listening to the sounds of the Wilson household coming to life, water running through pipes, the clatter of dishes, low voices in conversation. Normal sounds, family sounds that made her chest ache with longing. A soft knock at the door preceded Martha Wilson's voice. "Emma? Breakfast is ready whenever you are. No rush." Emma dressed slowly in the same clothes she'd worn yesterday, the only clean outfit remaining in her backpack. She brushed her long brown hair with her fingers, wishing for a proper brush, and splashed water on her face in the bathroom. The girl who stared back at her from the mirror looked tired, with shadows under her green eyes and a tightness around her mouth that made her appear older than her 11 years. Downstairs, Martha and her husband Robert had set the table with plates of golden pancakes, bacon, and scrambled eggs. The abundance of food made Emma's eyes widen slightly. Ray had rarely provided proper meals, usually tossing her fast food bags or telling her to make do with whatever was available in their temporary accommodations. "Good morning, Emma," Robert said cheerfully. "Hope you like pancakes. They're my specialty." Emma nodded, sliding into a chair and watching warily as Martha filled a glass with orange juice and placed it beside her plate. "Sheriff Miller called this morning," Martha said gently. "He's going to come by after breakfast to talk about what happens next. In the meantime, please eat as much as you want." Emma ate slowly, savoring each bite of the delicious food while trying not to appear too eager. Years with Ray had taught her that showing too much enthusiasm for anything, food, school, potential friendships, could result in it being taken away as a form of control or punishment. After breakfast, Emma helped clear the table despite Martha's protests that it wasn't necessary. The simple domestic act felt strangely comforting, a momentary illusion of normalcy in the chaos her life had become. Sheriff Miller arrived at 9, his patrol car pulling into the Wilsons' driveway just as Emma finished drying the last plate. He smiled when he saw her, noting that she looked slightly better than she had yesterday, less shell-shocked, though still guarded. "Morning, Emma," he said. "Did you sleep okay?" Emma nodded, her eyes already questioning. "Did you find Ray?" James shook his head, not sugarcoating the truth. "No, and honestly, I don't expect to. But I have been working on finding you a good place to stay while we sort everything out." Emma's expression closed immediately. "You mean foster care?" "Not exactly," James said. "I have a friend, Mike Logan. He lives in a cabin up in the mountains, about an hour from here. It's beautiful up there, forests, streams, wildlife. He's a good man who's been through some tough times himself. He's offered to let you stay with him temporarily while we try to locate any family you might have." Emma's brow furrowed. Why would a stranger want me to stay with him? "Mike was an Army Ranger, a soldier who served our country for many years," James explained. "He's been looking for a purpose since he came home. I think you might be good for each other." Emma didn't look convinced. "Is he married? Does he have kids?" "No," James admitted. "He lives alone. But his cabin has plenty of room, and it's a safe place to heal and think about what comes next." "Do I have a choice?" Emma asked bluntly. James appreciated her directness. The alternative would be entering the foster care system officially. That might mean moving to Billings or even further away, changing schools, possibly moving between different homes. With Mike, you'd at least have stability for a while, and you'd stay in this county where I can keep an eye on things. Emma considered this, her young face serious as she weighed her limited options. "Can I meet him first? Before deciding?" James nodded, relieved by her reasonable request. "That's exactly what I was hoping. I thought we could drive up today, you could see the cabin and meet Mike, and if it seems like a good fit, you could stay. If not, we'll come back and explore other options." Emma glanced at Martha, who had been listening quietly to the conversation. "The Wilsons have been very nice," she said softly. "Could I stay here?" Martha's expression was gentle but sad. "We're actually leaving next week for Arizona. Robert's arthritis gets worse in the Montana winters, so we spend 6 months down south each year. Otherwise, we'd be happy to have you, dear." Emma nodded, understanding. More impermanence, more transition, the story of her young life. "Okay," she said finally. "I'll meet your friend." The drive to Mike Logan's cabin took just over an hour, winding through increasingly remote mountain roads until they turned onto a narrow dirt track that climbed steeply through dense pine forest. Emma sat quietly in the passenger seat, watching as the landscape became more rugged and wild with each passing mile. "Mike bought this land 2 years ago," James explained as they drove. "Built most of the cabin himself. It's off-grid, solar panels for electricity, a well for water, wood stove for heat. Simple living, but everything you need." Emma didn't respond, her attention focused on the forest around them. Tall pines stretched toward the sky, their green needles contrasting with the brilliant blue above. Occasionally, gaps in the trees revealed breathtaking views of distant mountains and valleys. Despite her anxiety about meeting this unknown man who might become her temporary guardian, Emma couldn't help feeling a sense of peace in this wild, beautiful place. The cabin appeared suddenly as they rounded a bend, a substantial 2-story structure built of logs and stone, with large windows and a wide porch wrapping around 3 sides. It was more impressive than Emma had imagined, blending naturally into the surrounding forest as though it had grown from the mountainside itself. A tall figure stood on the porch as they pulled up, watching their arrival with an unreadable expression. Mike Logan was a striking presence, 6'3" with broad shoulders and the lean, powerful build of someone who remained physically active despite his isolation. His dark hair was cut short in military fashion, silver beginning to thread through the temples, and his face was weathered by sun and wind, deep lines etched around eyes that had seen too much. As Emma stepped out of the car, those eyes, a startling ice blue, locked onto hers with an intensity that might have been intimidating if not for the flash of recognition she saw in them. Not recognition of her specifically, but recognition of what she carried, the weight of abandonment, of loss, of being unwanted. In that brief moment of eye contact, Emma sensed that this stranger understood her in a way few others could. "Mike," James said, breaking the silence. "This is Emma Parker." "Emma, this is my friend Michael Logan." Mike nodded once, his expression softening slightly. "Welcome to the cabin, Emma," he said, his voice deep but surprisingly gentle. "This will be our homestead, if you decide to stay." For several long moments, Emma stood motionless, studying the cabin and the man who owned it. Beyond the structure, the forest stretched in every direction, vibrant green pines swaying gently in the mountain breeze. The air here was different, crisp, clean, carrying the scent of pine sap and wild herbs. A red-tailed hawk circled lazily overhead, its sharp cry echoing across the clearing. "Want to see inside?" Mike asked, his voice neutral, neither eager nor reluctant. Emma appreciated that he wasn't trying to sell her on the idea of staying, wasn't pretending enthusiasm he didn't feel. She nodded, following as he led the way up the porch steps and through the heavy wooden front door. The interior of the cabin was surprisingly bright and spacious, with high ceilings and large windows that framed the spectacular mountain views. The main room combined living area and kitchen, dominated by a massive stone fireplace that reached to the ceiling. The furnishings were simple but well-crafted, a leather sofa and 2 armchairs arranged around a coffee table made from a cross-section of an enormous tree trunk, bookshelves built into the walls and filled with volumes on every subject imaginable. "I built most of this myself," Mike said, noticing her interest in the craftsmanship. "Took me a year. The previous structure was barely standing when I bought the property." Emma ran her hand along the smooth wooden railing of the staircase. "You did a good job." A ghost of a smile touched Mike's lips, there and gone so quickly Emma almost missed it. "Kitchen stocked. Bathrooms through there. Power comes from solar panels on the roof, and there's a generator for backup. Water's from a well, clean enough to drink straight from the tap." He led them up the stairs to the 2nd floor, where a central hallway opened onto 3 bedrooms. "Master bedroom's mine," he said, gesturing to the door at the end of the hall. "These 2 are empty." He opened the first door, revealing a modest but comfortable room with a twin bed, dresser, and desk positioned beneath a window that looked out over the forest. "You'd have this one, if you decide to stay." Emma stepped inside, taking in the simple space. Unlike the guest room at the Wilsons with its cheerful yellow curtains and patchwork quilt, this room was unadorned, functional but impersonal. Yet somehow, that felt right. She didn't want a room that pretended to be a home, that tried too hard to make her feel welcome. This blank canvas, this honest emptiness, matched her current state far better. "There's a town about 20 minutes down the mountain," Mike continued. "Small, but it has a school, general store, medical clinic. Sheriff Miller can arrange enrollment for you if..." He trailed off, leaving the choice unspoken. James had been watching the interaction carefully, noting Emma's reactions and Mike's careful distance, not cold, but respecting her space, her autonomy. He understood his friend's approach. Mike was treating Emma the way he would have wanted to be treated at his lowest point, with dignity, without false promises or excessive sympathy. "Why don't I give you two a few minutes to talk?" James suggested. "I need to make some calls." He stepped outside, leaving Emma alone with Mike. The silence stretched between them, not entirely uncomfortable but weighted with the gravity of the decision before them. "Why would you let me stay here?" Emma finally asked, her direct gaze challenging. "You don't know me." Mike considered her question, resting his shoulder against the doorframe. "Truth?" Emma nodded. "Because James asked, and I owe him. Because this place has too many empty rooms. Because maybe helping you figure out your situation helps me figure out mine." He paused. "I'm not looking to be anyone's father, Emma. My own wasn't worth remembering, and I've got no idea how to be a good one. But I can offer shelter, food, and safety while you decide what comes next." His honesty was unexpected and strangely comforting. No false promises, no pretense that this would be some perfect fairy tale ending. "I don't need a father," Emma said firmly. "I've had enough disappointment in that department." Mike nodded. "Fair enough. If I stay, what are the rules?" "Simple ones. Don't go into the forest alone until I've taught you how to navigate. Help with chores, cooking, cleaning, firewood. Be honest. If you're angry, say so. If you're sad, that's allowed. If you want to leave, tell me, and I'll call James." He paused. "One more thing, the locked cabinet in my office is off limits." "That's it." Emma considered his terms, finding nothing unreasonable. "I can do that. I'm good at chores. Ray made me do most of everything anyway." A flicker of something, anger, perhaps, crossed Mike's face at the mention of her stepfather, but he kept his voice even. This would be different. Not punishment, just everyone doing their part. Emma walked to the window, looking out at the forest below. This remote cabin on a mountainside couldn't be more different from the seedy motels and cramped apartments she'd shared with Ray. The isolation that might have frightened some children felt like a relief to her. No curious neighbors, no pitying teachers, no social workers with their forced smiles and clipboard questions. "I'll stay," she decided. "For now." Mike nodded, accepting her decision without enthusiasm or reluctance. "We'll need supplies then. Clothes, school things. Whatever else 11-year-old girls need." The acknowledgement of her practical needs, spoken so matter-of-factly, almost undid Emma's carefully maintained composure. Ray had always treated her requirements for clothing, school supplies, or personal items as irritating impositions, unnecessary expenses that cut into his drinking and gambling money. "I don't need much," she said quickly. Mike's expression softened slightly. "Everyone needs the basics, Emma. It's not an imposition." James returned, and Emma informed him of her decision. If he was surprised by how quickly she'd made up her mind, he didn't show it. Instead, he outlined the practical arrangements. He would bring her belongings from the Wilsons, help with the necessary paperwork for school enrollment, and check in regularly to ensure the arrangement was working for both of them. "This is temporary," he reminded them both, "while we try to locate any family Emma might have. But temporary can be a week, a month, or longer, depending on what we find and what's best for Emma." Mike nodded. "Understood." As James prepared to leave, promising to return the following day with Emma's things and additional supplies, Emma stood on the porch beside Mike, watching the patrol car disappear down the winding forest road. The reality of her decision settled over her. She was staying in this remote cabin with a stranger, a former soldier with shadows in his eyes and mysteries of his own. "Hungry?" Mike asked, breaking the silence. Emma nodded, suddenly aware that she hadn't eaten since breakfast at the Wilsons'. "I can make sandwiches. Or there's soup." "Sandwiches are fine," Emma said, following him back inside. In the kitchen, Mike moved with efficient precision, laying out bread, slicing cheese and ham, adding lettuce and tomatoes without asking if she wanted them. Emma watched him, noting the economy of his movements, the way he didn't waste a single motion, a habit developed through military training, perhaps, or simply the self-sufficiency of someone accustomed to living alone. He placed a plate in front of her, the sandwich cut diagonally into two perfect triangles, with a handful of potato chips on the side and a glass of water. Nothing fancy, but more care than Ray had ever shown in feeding her. "Thank you," she said quietly. Mike nodded, making his own sandwich and sitting across from her at the kitchen table. They ate in silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable, just two people sharing a meal without feeling the need to fill the air with empty conversation. After lunch, Mike showed Emma the rest of the property, the woodshed stacked with neatly split logs for the coming winter, the small greenhouse where he grew vegetables year-round, the workshop attached to the back of the cabin where he crafted furniture and other wooden items. The tour was practical, focused on what she needed to know rather than trying to impress her. "I usually chop wood in the afternoons," he said as they returned to the cabin. "You can read, rest, explore near the cabin, but remember what I said about the forest. Too easy to get lost if you don't know these woods." Emma nodded, understanding the danger. "I'll stay close." True to his word, Mike spent the afternoon splitting logs with methodical precision, the rhythmic thunk of the axe a strangely comforting background noise as Emma explored the cabin more thoroughly. The bookshelves were filled with an eclectic collection, military history and tactics, wilderness survival guides, carpentry manuals, and classic literature. In one corner, she found a shelf of well-worn paperback novels, mysteries, adventures, science fiction, their spines cracked from multiple readings. Choosing a book about a child detective solving mysteries in a small town, Emma settled into one of the armchairs near the window. From there, she could see Mike working, his movements powerful and controlled as he transformed logs into perfectly split firewood. There was something reassuring about his presence, not warm or paternal, but solid, dependable. As the afternoon light began to fade, Mike returned to the cabin, washing up at the kitchen sink before beginning dinner preparations. Without being asked, Emma put her book away and joined him, wordlessly taking on the task of washing vegetables while he prepared a simple stir-fry. They worked together seamlessly, as if this were a long-established routine rather than their first meal as reluctant housemates. After dinner, Emma helped clean up, then returned to her book while Mike worked at a desk in the corner, reviewing what appeared to be blueprints for a furniture project. The quiet domesticity of the evening was unlike anything Emma had experienced since her mother's death. With Ray, evenings had meant tension, waiting for him to return from bars, often drunk and angry, or listening to him argue with shadowy business associates over phones that were replaced weekly. Here, in this remote cabin with this quiet, damaged man, Emma felt something she hadn't experienced in years: safety. Not happiness, not yet, perhaps not ever. But the fundamental security of knowing that tonight, at least, there would be no shouting, no threats, no need to make herself invisible to avoid becoming a target. As darkness fell completely outside the windows, Mike stood, stretching his back. "It gets cold up here at night, even in summer. Extra blankets in the closet if you need them." Emma nodded, suddenly realizing how exhausted she was. The emotional toll of the past 2 days, the abandonment, the uncertainty, the decisions, crashed over her in a wave of bone-deep weariness. "Bathroom's yours first," Mike said, recognizing her fatigue. "There's a new toothbrush in the drawer. Towels on the shelf." The simple consideration, having a new toothbrush ready, nearly brought tears to Emma's eyes. She managed a quiet thank you before retreating to the bathroom, where she finally allowed herself a moment of breakdown, silent tears streaming down her face as she stared at her reflection in the mirror. This wasn't home. Mike wasn't family. None of this was permanent or secure. But for tonight, it was shelter. For tonight, she was safe. For tonight, that would have to be enough. In the morning, Emma woke disoriented, momentarily panicked at the unfamiliar ceiling above her bed. The events of the previous days came rushing back: Ray's abandonment, the sheriff, the Wilsons, and finally, this cabin and the taciturn former soldier who had taken her in. Sunlight streamed through the window, dappling the wooden floor with patterns of light and shadow. Outside, birds called to one another, their songs unlike the urban noises she was accustomed to. She lay still for a moment, absorbing the unfamiliar peace of this place, before finally rising and dressing in yesterday's clothes, the only ones she had. Downstairs, she found Mike already awake, standing at the stove flipping pancakes. A mug of steaming coffee sat at his elbow, and the cabin was filled with the aroma of breakfast and freshly brewed coffee. "Morning," he said, not turning around. "Sleep okay?" "Yes," Emma answered, surprised to realize it was true. Despite the strange surroundings, she had slept deeply, without the nightmares that had plagued her since her mother's death. "Pancakes in 5 minutes. Orange juice in the fridge if you want it." Emma poured herself a glass of juice and set the table without being asked, finding plates and silverware in the cabinets with minimal searching. By the time Mike brought over a stack of golden pancakes, she had everything arranged neatly. "James called," Mike said as they ate. "He's bringing your things from the Wilsons around 10. Said he's got some paperwork for temporary guardianship, school enrollment forms, that kind of thing." Emma nodded, spearing a piece of pancake with her fork. "So it's official then? I'm staying?" "For now," Mike confirmed. "Until they find your family, if they exist. Or until you decide you'd rather be somewhere else." The pancakes were surprisingly good, light, fluffy, with hints of cinnamon and vanilla. Another small revelation about this man who seemed full of contradictions: the battle-hardened soldier who made perfect pancakes, the recluse who opened his home to a child in need despite his obvious discomfort. "These are really good," she said between bites. Mike's expression remained impassive, but she caught the slight relaxation of his shoulders at the compliment. "My grandmother's recipe. She taught me to cook when I was about your age." It was the first personal detail he had offered, a tiny window into his past. Emma filed it away, curious but unwilling to push for more information. She sensed that Mike was like her in this way, protective of his history, careful about what he shared and with whom. After breakfast, Mike showed her how to operate the washing machine in a small utility room off the kitchen. "We should wash your clothes before James brings the rest of your things. There are some old t-shirts in that drawer that you can wear while they're in the laundry. They'll be huge on you, but they're clean." The consideration was so unexpected that Emma didn't know how to respond. Ray had never once concerned himself with whether she had clean clothes, often forcing her to wash her few garments in motel bathroom sinks and dry them over shower rods. "Thank you," she said finally. Mike nodded, leaving her to the task while he went outside to check on something in the greenhouse. Alone in the cabin, Emma looked around, still absorbing the reality of her new temporary home. The interior was Spartan but comfortable, everything meticulously organized and clean. No empty bottles or overflowing ashtrays like Ray's places, no suspicious plastic bags hidden in drawer corners or strange men appearing at all hours with nervous eyes and bulging pockets. She started the washing machine and changed into one of Mike's t-shirts, which hung to her knees like a dress. The fabric smelled of laundry detergent and faintly of pine, the same scent that seemed to permeate the entire cabin. Rolling up the sleeves, she wandered into the living room, drawn again to the bookshelves. Her education had been inconsistent at best as Ray moved them from place to place, but reading had always been her escape. Teachers, recognizing her intelligence despite her spotty attendance, had often given her books, which Ray had reluctantly allowed her to keep as long as they didn't take up too much space in his car. Running her fingers along the spines of Mike's collection, Emma was surprised by the range: classic literature she recognized from school assignments alongside practical manuals on everything from wilderness survival to automotive repair. An entire shelf was dedicated to military history and strategy, while another held books on woodworking and furniture design. The lowest shelves contained fiction, dog-eared paperback mysteries, science fiction novels, and adventure stories. Selecting a book about a girl who discovered a secret garden, Emma curled into one of the armchairs by the window, losing herself in the story while waiting for James to arrive with her belongings. She was so engrossed that she didn't hear Mike return until he cleared his throat gently, startling her from her reading. "Sorry," he said, noticing her jump. "Didn't mean to scare you." "It's okay," Emma replied, dog-earing the page to mark her place. "This is a good book." Mike nodded, his eyes softening slightly as he recognized the title. "My grandmother had that one too. She read it to me when I was sick with pneumonia one winter." Another small revelation, another piece of the puzzle that was Michael Logan. Before Emma could respond, the sound of a vehicle approaching drew their attention to the window. Sheriff Miller's patrol car was making its way up the dirt road to the cabin. James arrived bearing not only Emma's backpack from the Wilsons but also several shopping bags from stores in town. "Martha Wilson added some things she thought you might need," he explained as they unloaded the bags onto the kitchen table. "And I picked up some basics, clothes, school supplies, toiletries." Emma stared at the bounty spread before her, new jeans and t-shirts in her size, socks, underwear, a hooded sweatshirt for cool mountain evenings, notebooks, pens, pencils, a scientific calculator, shampoo, conditioner, a hairbrush, even a small stuffed bear wearing a miniature sheriff's badge. This is too much," she stammered, overwhelmed by the generosity. "It's just the essentials," James said gently. "Everyone deserves to have their basic needs met, Emma." She caught Mike watching her reaction, his expression unreadable. Was he regretting his decision to take her in, realizing the responsibility he had undertaken? But he simply nodded at James's words, adding, "You can put everything in your room. We'll go into town tomorrow for anything else you need." While Emma sorted through her new possessions upstairs, the men discussed practical matters in the kitchen, the temporary guardianship arrangement, school enrollment, medical authorization forms. James had moved with remarkable efficiency, leveraging his position and connections to cut through bureaucratic red tape that might otherwise have taken weeks to navigate. "The school principal is expecting you Monday morning," James explained when Emma returned downstairs. "It's a small school, about 60 kids total from kindergarten through 8th grade. They're used to handling special circumstances." Emma nodded, grateful that she wouldn't have to explain her situation to teachers or classmates. Small schools meant everyone knew everyone else's business, but in this case, that might be a blessing rather than a curse. "I've also scheduled a checkup at the clinic for tomorrow afternoon," James continued. "Just routine, they'll need medical records for the school." Again, Emma nodded, though the thought of a medical examination made her nervous. Ray had avoided doctors, refusing to take her for checkups or even when she was ill, fearing questions about their living situation and his guardianship status. "One more thing," James said, reaching into his jacket pocket. "I have something that belongs to you." He handed her a folded photograph, the one from her backpack, showing her mother smiling on a summer day in a park, her arm around a much younger Emma. The photo was worn at the edges from constant handling, the only image of her mother that Emma had managed to keep through years of Ray's carelessness. "I thought I'd lost it," Emma whispered, her fingers trembling slightly as she took the precious memento. "It was in the side pocket of your backpack," James explained. "Martha found it when she was checking for laundry." Emma's vision blurred with unexpected tears, which she quickly blinked away. "Thank you." After James left, promising to check in regularly, Emma and Mike fell into an uncertain routine, neither fully comfortable with each other, but both making efforts to navigate their new living arrangement. Mike showed her how to operate the wood stove that heated the cabin, explained the solar power system, and outlined basic safety procedures for living in such a remote location. "Cell service is spotty up here," he explained, handing her a satellite phone. "This works anywhere. My number and Sheriff Miller's are programmed in. If there's ever an emergency and I'm not here, use it." The practical instruction continued through dinner, a hearty beef stew that Mike had started in a slow cooker earlier in the day, and into the evening. Emma absorbed everything, asking occasional questions but mostly listening attentively. Her survival had always depended on quickly understanding the rules and expectations of each new environment Ray had dragged her into. This situation was no different, even if the setting and caretaker were vastly improved. As darkness fell outside, the forest becoming a wall of impenetrable shadow beyond the windows, Mike built a fire in the massive stone fireplace. The flames cast dancing light across the room, creating a sense of sanctuary against the wilderness outside. Emma, exhausted from the emotional roller coaster of the past days, felt her eyelids growing heavy as she watched the fire from her position curled in one of the armchairs. The warmth, the quiet crackling of burning wood, the gentle ticking of a clock somewhere in the room, all combined to create a sense of security she hadn't felt in years. Just before she drifted off completely, she became aware of Mike draping a soft blanket over her, his movements careful, as if trying not to wake her. Through half-closed eyes, she saw him pause, looking down at her with an expression that wasn't quite a smile but held something softer than his usual stoicism, concern, perhaps, or the faintest beginning of protectiveness. "Rest easy," he said quietly, his deep voice barely audible above the crackling fire. "You're safe here." And for the first time since Ray had driven away from that gas station, Emma believed it might be true. The following days established a routine that provided structure and stability Emma hadn't experienced in years. Mike rose early, usually before dawn, and was often already working in his workshop or the greenhouse by the time Emma came downstairs. They would share a simple breakfast, sometimes pancakes, other days oatmeal or eggs, before tackling the day's tasks together. Mike proved to be a patient teacher, showing Emma how to tend the greenhouse plants, identify edible berries and mushrooms in the areas immediately surrounding the cabin, and perform basic maintenance tasks that kept their off-grid existence functioning smoothly. He never praised excessively but acknowledged her quick learning with nods of approval that, somehow, meant more than Ray's rare and usually manipulative compliments. Their trip to town revealed another side of Mike, the way the locals regarded him with a mixture of respect and curiosity, nodding greetings but rarely approaching directly. At the general store, the proprietor, a woman in her 60s named Helen, widened her eyes in surprise when Mike introduced Emma as his temporary ward. "Well now, this is unexpected," Helen said, her gaze moving between them thoughtfully. "Sheriff Miller mentioned something, but I didn't quite believe it." Mike's expression remained impassive. "Emma needs school clothes, supplies. Whatever else 11-year-old girls require." Helen's weathered face softened as she looked at Emma. "Of course, dear. Let me show you what we have." Under Helen's guidance, Emma selected additional clothing, toiletries, and school supplies that hadn't been covered by James's initial shopping. Mike paid without comment, his only input an occasional get-to when Emma hesitated over necessary items. The medical examination at the small clinic went better than Emma had feared. Dr. Sarah Martinez, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and gentle hands, conducted the checkup efficiently while explaining each step. When she noted Emma's underweight condition and signs of previous nutritional deficiencies, her expression grew concerned. "We'll want to focus on building you up," she told Emma, though her gaze flicked to Mike. "Plenty of protein, calcium, fresh vegetables. I'm prescribing a multivitamin as well." Mike nodded, absorbing the instructions with the same serious attention he gave to everything concerning Emma's welfare. "We'll handle it." Later, as they drove back up the mountain road to the cabin, Emma watched the town recede in the side mirror, replaced by increasingly dense forest. The isolation that had initially seemed like a sanctuary now carried a hint of vulnerability. She and Mike were fundamentally alone up here, dependent on each other in ways that both comforted and concerned her. "You can change your mind," Mike said suddenly, as if reading her thoughts. "If this isn't working for you. One call to James, and he'll find another arrangement." Emma looked at him, surprised by the offer. "Do you want me to leave?" Mike kept his eyes on the winding road. "No. But this isn't about what I want. It's about what's best for you." The simple statement, delivered without drama or manipulation, struck Emma powerfully. In her 11 years, she couldn't remember a single adult who had prioritized her needs over their own convenience or desires. Even her mother, whom she had loved fiercely, had made choices influenced by addiction and dysfunctional relationships that had ultimately harmed them both. "I want to stay," she said finally. "For now." Mike nodded, accepting her decision without further comment. They completed the drive in comfortable silence, the forest embracing them as they returned to the cabin that was becoming, against all odds, something close to home. Monday morning arrived with a light mist shrouding the forest, tendrils of fog weaving between the pine trees and softening the harsh mountain landscape. Emma stood on the porch, dressed in new jeans and a blue sweater, her backpack filled with freshly purchased school supplies, watching as Mike loaded his truck for the drive to Riverdale Elementary. "Nervous?" Mike asked, noticing her rigid posture. Emma shrugged, unwilling to admit how much the prospect of another new school terrified her. This would be her 5th school in 3 years, each previous experience marred by her status as the perpetual new kid, the one with second-hand clothes and incomplete assignments, the one who disappeared without warning when Ray decided it was time to move again. "It's small," Mike said, not pushing for a response she wasn't ready to give. 38 kids total in grades 6 through 8. Your class has 9 students. The information was meant to be reassuring, but Emma wasn't sure if a smaller school would be better or worse. Fewer places to hide, fewer chances to blend into the background, but perhaps also fewer established social hierarchies to navigate. The drive to town was quiet, the truck's heater gradually dispelling the morning chill. Emma watched the landscape change as they descended from the mountain, dense forest giving way to scattered homesteads and eventually the small collection of buildings that constituted downtown Riverdale. Riverdale Elementary occupied a 2-story brick building that looked as though it had been standing since Montana achieved statehood. American and state flags fluttered from poles in the front yard, and a hand-painted sign welcomed students to the new school year. Several children played on aging playground equipment in the side yard, their laughter carrying across the parking lot as Mike's truck pulled up. Principal Eleanor Winters was waiting in the front office, a tall woman with silver-streaked black hair and intelligent eyes behind tortoiseshell glasses. "You must be Emma," she said warmly, extending her hand as if greeting an adult rather than a child. "Welcome to Riverdale Elementary." Emma shook the offered hand, appreciating the absence of condescension in the principal's manner. "Thank you, ma'am. Sheriff Miller provided your records, such as they are," Principal Winters continued. "We'll need to do some assessment testing to determine where you stand academically, but that can wait until you've had a chance to settle in. Today is just about getting oriented." Mike, who had been standing silently by the door, cleared his throat softly. "I'll pick her up at 3? Principal Winters nodded. "Perfect. Emma will be in good hands, Mr. Logan." An awkward moment followed as both Emma and Mike realized they hadn't discussed any farewell ritual. A hug would have been excessive given the newness of their relationship, but a simple goodbye seemed inadequate for the milestone this represented. Finally, Mike simply nodded. "You've got the satellite phone if you need anything. And the school has my number." "I'll be fine," Emma said, mustering confidence she didn't entirely feel. With that, Mike departed, leaving Emma to follow Principal Winters through the maze of hallways to her new classroom. The principal knocked once on a door marked 6 to 8 grade before opening it, revealing a classroom that immediately struck Emma as different from any she had experienced before. Instead of the rigid rows of desks she was accustomed to, the room was arranged in small clusters of tables, with bookshelves, bean-bag chairs, and learning stations creating distinct spaces within the larger classroom. Maps and student artwork covered the walls, and large windows overlooked the playground and forest beyond. Mrs. Alexandra Torres, the middle school teacher, paused mid-sentence as they entered. In her early 30s with warm brown eyes and dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, she exuded an energy that was engaging without being overwhelming. "Everyone, this is Emma Parker, who's joining our 6th grade group," Principal Winters announced. "Emma, this is Mrs. Torres and your classmates." 8 pairs of eyes turned toward Emma with varying degrees of curiosity and welcome. Unlike her previous schools and larger towns, where she could detect the immediate social assessment and potential rejection, these students simply seemed interested in the novelty of a new classmate in their small community. "Welcome, Emma," Mrs. Torres said warmly. We've been studying Montana ecosystems this week, so your timing is perfect. Harper, would you show Emma to the empty desk in your group and catch her up on our project? A girl with curly red hair and freckles scattered across her nose smiled and waved Emma over to a table where she sat with two other students, a boy with glasses and a girl with a long dark braid. I'm Harper, the redhead whispered as Emma slid into the vacant chair. That's Zach and Maya. We're creating a model of the alpine ecosystem. You want to help with the animals or the plants? The simplicity of the question, the immediate inclusion in their project without question or hesitation, caught Emma off guard. Animals, I guess? Perfect, Harper grinned. Zach's hopeless at sculpting, and Maya and I are already working on the vegetation. There's clay in that bin if you want to start on some mountain goats or pikas. The morning passed in a blur of activity as Emma was absorbed into the group project, her initial nervousness gradually fading as she focused on crafting miniature wildlife from modeling clay. Mrs. Torres moved between the groups, offering suggestions and asking thoughtful questions that pushed the students to think more deeply about the ecosystems they were recreating. By lunchtime, Emma had created several remarkably detailed animals for their model and had begun to learn about her tablemates. Harper, she discovered, lived on a small ranch outside town with her parents and three younger brothers. Maya's mother ran the general store where Emma and Mike had shopped, and her father was a park ranger. Zach's family operated the local diner, which, according to Harper, made the best huckleberry pancakes in Montana. The cafeteria was simply a large room with tables at one end and a small kitchen at the other, where two women served homemade meals rather than the processed institutional food Emma was accustomed to from her previous schools. Today's lunch was beef stew with fresh biscuits, the aroma reminding Emma of the meal Mike had prepared their first night at the cabin. You're staying with Mr. Logan, right? Harper asked as they sat down with their trays. My dad says he was some kind of super soldier before he moved here. Emma, unsure how to respond given her limited knowledge of Mike's background, simply shrugged. He's nice. Quiet. My mom says he built his entire cabin himself, Maya added. She says he comes into the store like clockwork once a month for supplies, never talks much, but always helps Mrs. Gunderson load her groceries if he sees her struggling. Is he your uncle or something? Zach asked, pushing his glasses up his nose. No, Emma said carefully. He's just helping me out for a while. Until they find my family. She waited for the inevitable follow-up questions, the prying into why she needed someone to help her out, why she wasn't with her parents, where she had come from. In her previous schools, such revelations had immediately marked her as different, pitiful, a subject for gossip and speculation. But these children, perhaps accustomed to the close-knit community where neighbors routinely helped one another through difficult times, simply nodded in acceptance. Mrs. Winters does that sometimes, Harper explained. Finds places for kids who need somewhere to stay. My cousin Eli lived with the Johnsons for a whole year when my aunt was in the hospital. The matter-of-fact acceptance, the absence of judgment or pity, allowed Emma to relax slightly, to begin imagining that perhaps this school, this town, might be different from the others she had briefly passed through. The afternoon brought further surprises as Mrs. Torres conducted individualized assessment tests to determine Emma's academic standing. Despite her fragmented education and frequent school changes, Emma had managed to maintain grade-level proficiency in most subjects and was actually advanced in reading and language arts, a testament to her self-directed learning during the many hours Ray had left her alone. You're a natural scholar, Emma, Mrs. Torres commented as she reviewed the test results. Your reading comprehension is exceptional for your age. Have you always enjoyed books? Emma nodded, thinking of the hours spent in public libraries, safe, warm places where Ray rarely bothered her, where she could escape into stories of children with normal lives and adventures that had nothing to do with dodging bill collectors or moving in the middle of the night. Mr. Logan has lots of books at the cabin, she offered. He let me borrow one about a secret garden. Mrs. Torres smiled. That's one of my favorites. If you finish it, I'd love to hear what you think. We do book discussions every Friday afternoon. By the time the final bell rang at 3 o'clock, Emma had begun to cautiously hope that Riverdale Elementary might become more than just another temporary stop in her tumultuous journey. The small class size, the individual attention from Mrs. Torres, the matter-of-fact acceptance from her classmates, all created a learning environment unlike anything she had previously experienced. Mike was waiting in the parking lot, his truck idling as students poured out of the building. Emma spotted him immediately, a tall, solid presence leaning against the driver's door, his expression neutral but watchful. She was surprised by the small surge of relief she felt at seeing him, at the realization that he had come exactly when he said he would, a simple reliability that Ray had never demonstrated. "How is it?" he asked as she approached, taking her backpack and placing it behind the seat. "Good," Emma said, surprised to find she meant it. "Different. Small." Mike nodded, accepting her assessment without pressing for details. "Hungry?" The question, which had become part of their daily routine, made Emma smile slightly. Mike's consistent concern with her basic needs, was she hungry, warm enough, did she have what she required for school or sleep, continued to surprise her. It wasn't emotional or demonstrative, but it was steadfast, reliable. "Yes," she admitted. "But I have homework." "We'll stop at the diner," Mike decided. "You can eat and work at the same time." The Riverdale diner occupied a converted railcar at the edge of town, its chrome exterior gleaming in the afternoon sunlight. Inside, red vinyl booths lined the windows, and a long counter with swiveling stools faced the open kitchen where Zach's parents worked side by side, preparing comfort food that drew customers from as far away as Billings. Zach waved from a booth where he was already working on homework, and after a moment's hesitation, Emma waved back. The simple acknowledgement, the inclusion it represented, warmed her in unexpected ways. Mike led them to a booth near the back, positioning himself so he could see the entrance, a habit Emma had noticed during their previous trips into town. They had just settled when Helen, the proprietor of the general store, approached their table. "Mike Logan, twice in town in one day," she said, her tone gently teasing. "The world must be ending." Mike's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes softened slightly. Emma had her first day of school. Thought she deserved a proper meal. Helen smiled warmly at Emma. "Mrs. Torres runs a good classroom. My Maya says you're quite the artist with clay animals." Emma blushed, and used to praise or attention. "They're just small." "Sometimes the smallest details are the most important," Helen replied. "Now, what can I get you too?" They ordered, a cheeseburger and fries for Emma, black coffee and apple pie for Mike, and settled into a comfortable silence as Emma spread her homework across the table. The math worksheet was straightforward, problems she could solve without much effort, allowing her mind to wander as she worked. The diner hummed with quiet conversation and the clatter of dishes from the kitchen. Afternoon sunlight slanted through the windows, creating pools of golden light on the worn linoleum floor. From her position, Emma could see Zach consulting with his mother about something, his father flipping burgers with practiced precision, a couple in the far corner holding hands across their table. It was an ordinary scene, the kind depicted in television shows about small-town America, the kind she had observed from the outside throughout her chaotic childhood without ever feeling part of. Yet here she was, sitting in a booth with homework and a guardian who, while not family in any traditional sense, had provided more stability in a few days than Ray had in years. "Problem?" Mike asked, noticing her pencil had stopped moving. Emma shook her head. "Just thinking." Mike nodded, not pushing for elaboration, his attention returning to the worn paperback he'd pulled from his jacket pocket. Another quality Emma appreciated, he didn't demand conversation or explanations, allowed her the space to process her thoughts without intrusion. Their food arrived, and they ate in companionable silence, Emma occasionally asking for help with a particularly challenging math problem, Mike offering succinct but clear explanations. By the time they finished, Emma had completed her homework and consumed a meal that left her feeling satisfied in a way that fast food never had. As they prepared to leave, Helen approached their table again, this time carrying a paper bag. "Some huckleberry muffins for breakfast tomorrow," she said, placing the bag beside Emma. First day of school deserves a special treat. The simple kindness, offered without expectation of anything in return, caught Emma off guard. "Thank you," she managed, her voice slightly unsteady. Helen patted her shoulder gently. "You're welcome, sweetheart. You come back anytime." The drive back to the cabin was quiet, the truck's headlights cutting through the gathering dusk as they ascended the mountain road. Emma watched the town recede behind them, the scattered lights of Riverdale giving way to the darkness of the forest, yet for the first time, she didn't feel as though she was being taken away from civilization into isolation. Instead, there was a growing sense that they were returning home, not a permanent home, perhaps, but a safe haven nonetheless. At the cabin, Emma settled at the kitchen table with a book while Mike built a fire against the evening chill. The familiar routine, established over just a few days, already provided a structure and security that allowed Emma to relax in a way she hadn't in years. "Mrs. Torres says I'm good at reading," she said suddenly, surprising herself by initiating conversation. "And language arts. But I need to work on science." Mike nodded, adding another log to the growing flames. "We can help with that. Practical science all around us here, weather patterns, ecosystems, geology. You know about those things?" Emma asked, curious about the extent of Mike's knowledge, which seemed to encompass everything from carpentry to cooking to, apparently, natural sciences. "Some," he acknowledged. "Military teaches you to observe your environment, understand the natural world. Got interested in it after I came back. Studied on my own." It was the most he had shared about his military service, and Emma recognized the significance of the small confidence. "Could you teach me? About the forest and stuff?" Mike considered her request, his expression thoughtful. "Yes. Good skills to have, especially living up here. We'll start this weekend." The promise of shared activity, of knowledge freely offered, created a warm feeling in Emma's chest that had nothing to do with the crackling fire. It wasn't affection, exactly, both she and Mike were too guarded, too damaged for such easy emotion, but something adjacent to it. Trust, perhaps, or the beginnings of mutual respect. Later that night, as Emma prepared for bed, she found herself reflecting on the stark contrast between her current situation and where she had been just 1 week ago, abandoned at a gas station, waiting for a stepfather who would never return, facing a future of continued instability and neglect. Now she had a clean, warm room in a solid cabin, new clothes and school supplies, regular meals, and the watchful presence of a man who, while not demonstrative or particularly nurturing, provided a security and respect she had never known with Ray. It wasn't a family in any traditional sense, but it was more stability than she had experienced since her mother's death. As the moon rose over the mountain, casting silver light through her bedroom window, Emma allowed herself a small, cautious hope that perhaps this arrangement, however temporary, might give her the breathing space to heal from past wounds and prepare for whatever came next in her unpredictable journey. Days stretched into weeks as September gave way to October, bringing shorter days and the first hints of autumn color to the forest surrounding the cabin. Emma settled into a routine that balanced school, chores, and increasingly frequent lessons with Mike about wilderness survival and the natural environment of the mountain. These expeditions into the forest quickly became her favorite part of the week, Saturday mornings when Mike would wake her before dawn, prepare a thermos of hot chocolate and pack simple provisions, then lead her on hikes that combined physical challenge with practical education. Pine needles can be steeped for tea, he explained during one such excursion, demonstrating how to identify the edible varieties. High in vitamin C, good for preventing scurvy. "No one gets scurvy anymore," Emma protested, grinning at his serious expression. "History suggests otherwise," Mike replied, though a hint of amusement softened his usually stoic features. "Knowledge weighs nothing, costs nothing, might save your life someday." Under his patient guidance, Emma learned to identify edible plants and fungi, track wildlife through subtle signs, predict weather changes from cloud formations and wind patterns, and navigate using natural landmarks rather than relying on technology that could fail or be lost. "People think survival is about being tough," Mike told her as they rested beside a mountain stream, watching an eagle soar overhead. "It's really about being smart. Observant. working with nature, not against it. Emma absorbed these lessons eagerly, recognizing that Mike was sharing knowledge acquired through years of experience and formal training, knowledge that had likely saved his life in combat zones and hostile environments. The trust implicit in these teachings, the assumption that she was capable of learning and applying these skills, bolstered her confidence in ways more conventional praise never had. At school, Emma's initial cautious integration had blossomed into genuine belonging. Mrs. Torres had recognized her academic potential and provided challenging material that engaged her quick mind, while her classmates had accepted her with the straightforward inclusivity that seemed characteristic of the small community. Harper, in particular, had appointed herself Emma's unofficial guide to Riverdale's social landscape, ensuring she was included in weekend activities and school events. When Emma had hesitantly explained that she couldn't reciprocate with invitations to the cabin, Harper had simply shrugged. "Everyone knows Mr. Logan values his privacy," she'd said matter-of-factly. "No one takes it personally." On the last Friday in October, as Halloween approached, Principal Winters called Emma to her office during the lunch period. Worried that something was wrong, perhaps Sheriff Miller had located Ray, or worse, discovered he wasn't coming back, Emma entered the office with trepidation. "Nothing to worry about," Principal Winters assured her, noting her concerned expression. "I just wanted to check in on how you're settling in." Emma relaxed slightly, taking the offered seat across from the principal's desk. "Fine, I guess. Mrs. Torres is a good teacher." "And how are things with Mr. Logan?" "Sheriff Miller asks me to keep an eye on the arrangement." The question was presented neutrally, without implication or judgment, yet Emma felt an immediate surge of defensiveness. Despite the temporary nature of their living situation, she had come to value the stability and respect Mike provided, the quiet cabin that had become a sanctuary after years of chaos. "It's good," she said firmly. "He's teaching me about the forest, how to identify plants and track animals. And he makes sure I have everything I need for school." Principal Winters nodded, her expression thoughtful. "He's been very thorough about your educational needs. Mrs. Torres mentions he's been in twice to discuss your progress, and he's completed all the necessary paperwork for field trips and activities." The information surprised Emma. Mike hadn't mentioned these meetings, had simply ensured she had signed permission slips and necessary supplies without drawing attention to his involvement. "The reason I asked," Principal Winters continued, "is that Sheriff Miller has had no success locating any extended family members who might be able to take custody. Your mother's parents are deceased, and there appear to be no aunts, uncles, or other relatives on record." Emma absorbed this information with complex emotions, relief that she wouldn't be uprooted from her current stability, concern about what this meant for her future, and a lingering sadness at the confirmation of her essential aloneness in the world. "What happens now?" she asked, the same question she had posed to Sheriff Miller that first night at the station. "That depends partly on you," Principal Winters replied. The temporary guardianship arrangement with Mr. Logan was initially for 60 days, which would expire in mid-November. Sheriff Miller needs to know if you're comfortable remaining in that arrangement for a more extended period while more permanent solutions are explored. "You mean foster care?" Emma asked, her stomach tightening at the prospect. "That's one option," Principal Winters acknowledged. "Though finding an appropriate placement in Riverdale would be challenging. Most likely, you would be placed with a family in Billings or another larger community." The thought of leaving the cabin, the school, the tentative roots she had begun to establish, created a hollow feeling in Emma's chest. "Does Mike, Mr. Logan, want me to stay?" Principal Winters smiled slightly. "Sheriff Miller posed the same question to him yesterday. Mr. Logan's exact response was, 'Ask Emma what she wants. I'll abide by her decision.'" The words, so typically Mike in their directness and respect for her agency, brought unexpected tears to Emma's eyes, which she quickly blinked away. "I want to stay," she said firmly. "With Mike, at the cabin. If that's okay." "I'll inform Sheriff Miller of your preference," Principal Winters said. "He'll handle the necessary paperwork to extend the arrangement." And Emma, she hesitated, choosing her words carefully. Sometimes the families we choose are as important as those we're born into. As Emma returned to class, the principal's words echoed in her mind. The family she had been born into had disintegrated when her mother died and Ray revealed his true nature. Yet here in this small Montana town, in a cabin on a mountainside with a taciturn former soldier who treated her with unfailing respect and consideration, she had found something that felt, cautiously, like belonging. That evening, as they ate dinner at the kitchen table, Emma gathered her courage to broach the subject. "Principal Winters called me to her office today." Mike looked up from his stew, expression attentive. "Problem?" "No," Emma said. "She wanted to talk about what happens when the guardianship thing expires next month. She said Sheriff Miller asked if you wanted me to stay longer." Mike's expression remained neutral, though his eyes assessed her carefully. "What did you tell her?" "That I want to stay here. If that's still okay with you." For a long moment, Mike was silent, his gaze shifting to the window where darkness had already fallen, the forest outside invisible except for the occasional movement of branches in the wind. When he looked back at Emma, his expression had softened slightly, the stern lines of his face relaxed. "It's okay with me," he said simply. "For as long as you need." The words, unembellished and direct, contained no flowery promises or excessive sentiment. Yet in their very simplicity, their honesty, they offered more security than all of Ray's elaborate lies and manipulations combined. Mike would not abandon her at a gas station, would not disappear in the night leaving unpaid bills and broken promises. He would provide shelter, food, education, and respect for as long as she needed these things. It wasn't love, not in any conventional sense. It wasn't even family, with all the emotional complexity and permanence that word implied. But it was commitment, steadfast and reliable, from a man who had seen the worst of humanity yet still chose to offer protection to a child not his own. As the first snow of the season began to fall outside the cabin windows, Emma realized that sometimes, protection and respect could be more meaningful, more healing, than conventional expressions of care that proved hollow when tested. November brought the full force of Montana winter to the mountains, transforming the landscape around the cabin into a wonderland of white. Heavy snows blanketed the forest, bending pine boughs with their weight and creating a hushed stillness broken only by the occasional fall of snow from overladen branches. Inside the cabin, the wood stove radiated steady heat, keeping the cold at bay as Mike and Emma settled into their extended arrangement. The transition from temporary to semi-permanent guardianship had occurred with the same straightforward practicality that characterized their relationship: paperwork signed, minimal discussion of feelings, and a mutual acknowledgement that for now, at least, this unlikely partnership was the best option for both of them. On the first Sunday in December, Emma woke to the rich aroma of cinnamon and coffee wafting up from the kitchen. Curious, she pulled on thick socks and a sweater against the morning chill and padded downstairs to find Mike at the stove, monitoring a cast-iron skillet filled with something that made her stomach growl audibly. "What's that?" she asked, sliding onto a stool at the kitchen counter. "Cinnamon rolls," Mike replied, glancing up briefly. "My grandmother's recipe. December 1st tradition." It was the first mention of any personal tradition Mike had shared, and Emma absorbed this small revelation with interest. Despite living together for months, Mike remained something of an enigma, a man who clearly had a past filled with both pain and purpose, who had chosen isolation but was now sharing his space and his life with a child he barely knew. "Your grandmother taught you to cook," Emma recalled, remembering the brief reference he'd made during their first days together. Mike nodded, his focus on the skillet. "She raised me after my parents died. Car accident when I was 8. The simple statement, delivered without self-pity or drama, struck Emma powerfully. For the first time, she recognized a fundamental similarity in their experiences, both orphan young, both shaped by loss and subsequent caretakers who stepped in during crisis. "Was she nice? Your grandmother?" Emma asked carefully, sensing the rarity of this opening into Mike's closely guarded past. A ghost of a smile touched Mike's lips. "Tough as nails. No nonsense. Believed in hard work, responsibility, learning practical skills." He paused, carefully removing the skillet from the heat. "But kind, in her way. Never made me feel like a burden, even though taking on an 8-year-old boy couldn't have been easy for a widow in her 60s. Emma absorbed this, recognizing echoes of Mike's own approach to taking her in, the lack of sentimentality coupled with steady, reliable care, the emphasis on practical skills and self-sufficiency, the absence of any suggestion that her presence was an imposition. She died before I enlisted, Mike continued, surprising Emma with this additional confidence. Cancer. Fought it like she fought everything else, head on, no complaints. He began transferring the cinnamon rolls to plates. She would have liked you. No nonsense. Resilient. The unexpected compliment, embedded in this rare personal disclosure, warmed Emma more than any direct praise could have. To be compared favorably to someone Mike clearly respected and loved, to be recognized for qualities he valued, resilience, practicality, lack of self-pity, meant more than flowery compliments about her appearance or conventional achievements. These look amazing, she said, accepting the plate he slid toward her, recognizing his need to shift away from personal revelations. They ate in companionable silence, the sweet, spicy rolls still warm from the skillet, the cabin around them secure against the winter storm that had intensified overnight. Through the kitchen window, Emma could see snow falling in thick curtains, accumulating on the porch railing and obscuring the forest beyond. No school tomorrow, Mike said, following her gaze. Radio said the county's closing roads due to the blizzard. In her previous life with Ray, an unexpected school closure would have meant being left alone in whatever temporary accommodation they were occupying, possibly without adequate heat or food, while Ray pursued his own interests regardless of weather conditions. The contrast with her current situation, a warm, well-stocked cabin, the steady presence of a responsible adult who ensured her needs were met, still occasionally startled her with its normality. Can we still go to town for supplies? Emma asked. Their weekly trip to Riverdale for groceries and library books had become a fixed point in their routine, one Emma looked forward to for the brief social contact it provided. Mike shook his head. Not until the plows clear the mountain road. Probably Tuesday earliest. He considered her for a moment, reading her expression with the attentiveness that characterized his interactions with her. But we can use the time. Thought you might be ready to learn tracking in snow. Different from forest floor. More challenging, more rewarding. The prospect immediately brightened Emma's mood. Their wilderness lessons had continued throughout the fall, expanding to include practical survival skills like building emergency shelters, starting fires without matches, and finding water sources. Emma had proven an apt pupil, her natural intelligence and observational skills allowing her to absorb information quickly and apply it creatively. When can we go out? She asked eagerly. After the storm passes. Noon tomorrow, maybe. Mike rose, gathering their empty plates. For today, indoor skills. Maintenance on the generator, checking the solar batteries, inventory of emergency supplies. Winter up here isn't forgiving of carelessness. The day passed in practical activity as Mike guided Emma through the systems that kept their isolated home functioning through the harsh Montana winter. She learned to check the backup generator, monitor the solar power system's battery levels, inventory their emergency food supplies, and perform basic maintenance on tools essential for winter survival. By evening, the blizzard had reached its peak, howling around the cabin with a ferocity that might have been frightening if not for the solid construction and steady heat from the wood stove. Emma sat cross-legged on the floor near the fire, working on a school project, a detailed map of Montana's ecosystems that combined her newfound knowledge of the natural world with the artistic skills Mrs. Torres had encouraged. Mike occupied his usual armchair, ostensibly reading but occasionally watching Emma work, his expression thoughtful. Finally, he closed his book and cleared his throat softly. Sheriff Miller called this morning. While you were still asleep. Emma looked up, immediately alert. News from Sheriff Miller usually involved her status, the ongoing search for family, or other official matters related to her unusual guardianship situation. He's found a relative, she guessed, her stomach tightening with anxiety. No, Mike said quickly, then hesitated, choosing his words with uncharacteristic care. He received a call from Ray Donovan's sister in Idaho. She saw his name on a warrant list, contacted authorities to provide information. Emma's hands stilled on her project, her full attention now on Mike. Ray had never mentioned a sister, but that wasn't surprising. He had shared little about his past or family, preferring to live entirely in a present defined by immediate gratification and evasion of consequences. "What did she say?" Emma asked, her voice carefully neutral. Mike's gaze was steady, assessing her readiness for potentially difficult information. "She confirmed what we suspected. Ray has no biological connection to you, no legal claim to guardianship. He continued living with you after your mother's death to maintain access to her Social Security payments, which he was diverting for his own use." The confirmation of Ray's exploitation wasn't shocking. Emma had long suspected his motivations for keeping her, but hearing it stated plainly still stung. Despite everything, some childish part of her had clung to the possibility that Ray had felt some responsibility toward her, some minimal attachment that prevented him from simply abandoning her earlier. "She also provided information about your biological father," Mike continued, watching her reaction carefully. This was unexpected. Emma had few memories of her father, who had left when she was barely 3 years old. Her mother had rarely spoken of him, and when she did, it was with a mixture of sadness and resignation rather than the bitterness Emma might have expected. "His name is Daniel Parker. He lives in Seattle now. Sheriff Miller was able to contact him yesterday." Emma's heart seemed to stutter in her chest, a complex surge of emotions, hope, fear, anger, longing, washing over her in a disorienting wave. "He's alive? All this time?" Mike nodded, his expression grave. "According to Ray's sister, your mother left Daniel, not the other way around. Took you with her. She had addiction issues even then, was unstable. Daniel tried to find you both for nearly 2 years, hired private investigators, but your mother was good at disappearing, changing names." The revelation upended Emma's understanding of her own history. In the narrative she had constructed from fragments of memory and her mother's occasional comments, her father had been the deserter, the one who couldn't handle family responsibility. To consider an alternative, that her mother had been the one to flee, to sever connections, to deny her a relationship with a father who had actually wanted her, was profoundly disorienting. Eventually, he had to accept that she didn't want to be found. Mike continued quietly. "He remarried 5 years ago, has 2 young children with his new wife. But according to Sheriff Miller, he was shocked to learn about your situation, had no idea your mother had passed away." Emma stared into the fire, trying to process this rewriting of her personal history. "What does he want?" "Now, I mean." "He wants to meet you," Mike said simply. "He's flying to Billings next weekend. Sheriff Miller arranged for him to come to Riverdale, if you're willing to see him." The prospect of meeting this stranger who was nonetheless her biological father, who shared her DNA and might have answers to questions she hadn't even formulated yet, filled Emma with conflicting emotions. Part of her yearned for the connection, for the possibility of family beyond the temporary arrangement with Mike. Another part feared disappointment, rejection, or the disruption of the stability she had finally achieved. "You don't have to decide right now," Mike added, sensing her turmoil. "Take time to think about it. Whatever you choose, we'll handle it." The "we" was subtle but significant, a reminder that regardless of her decision about meeting Daniel Parker, Emma wasn't facing this situation alone. Mike would remain a steady presence, a buffer between her and potential hurt, a source of practical support and understated protection. "What if he wants me to live with him?" Emma asked, voicing her deepest fear, not of rejection, but of being uprooted from the home and community where she had finally begun to heal and thrive. Mike's expression remained neutral, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of emotion quickly suppressed. "That would be a legal matter. You're his biological child, which gives him rights. But there are other considerations, your preferences, the stability of your current situation, what's in your best interest." He paused, then added with characteristic honesty, "I won't lie to you, Emma. If he's a good man, able to provide a stable home, a complete family, that might be the best outcome for your future. But nothing happens immediately. There would be a process, time to adjust to the idea, to get to know him first. The practical assessment, delivered without sentimentality or emotional manipulation, was exactly what Emma needed. Mike wasn't trying to influence her decision through guilt or attachment. He was presenting reality as he saw it, respecting her intelligence and emotional resilience. "Would you mind," she asked quietly, "if I went to live with him eventually?" For the first time, Mike hesitated, vulnerability briefly visible behind his usual stoicism. "I'd miss having you here," he admitted finally. "You've brought life back to this place. Purpose. But this arrangement was always about what you needed, not what I wanted." Still is. The simple honesty of his response, the absence of emotional manipulation or false reassurance, reinforced what Emma had come to value most about their unusual relationship, its fundamental basis in respect and truth, however difficult or complex. "I think I want to meet him," she decided. "But not alone. I want you there." Mike nodded, accepting her decision and the role she was asking him to play. "Of course." The blizzard continued through the night and into the following day, eventually tapering off to reveal a transformed landscape, pristine white drifts sculpted by the wind, trees heavy with snow, the forest a study in white and shadow. By early afternoon, the storm had fully passed, leaving behind a crystalline blue sky and brilliant sunshine that made the snow-covered world sparkle as if dusted with diamonds. True to his promise, Mike led Emma into the forest for her lesson in winter tracking. Bundled in layers against the sub-zero temperatures, they made their way carefully through knee-deep snow to a clearing where animal tracks crisscrossed the unmarked expanse. "Reading sign in snow requires different techniques," Mike explained, kneeling beside a set of delicate impressions. "These are rabbit tracks. See how they form a distinct pattern, two larger impressions followed by two smaller ones?" Emma nodded, mentally cataloging the pattern for future reference. "The front tracks are actually made by the back feet," Mike continued. "Rabbit pushes off with its front feet, swings its back feet forward and outside the front feet, then brings the front feet down in the track behind. Creates this distinctive hopping pattern." For the next 2 hours, they moved through the forest, Mike pointing out the subtle differences between tracks made by various creatures, the five-toed impressions of weasels, the distinctive hoof prints of deer, the perfect snowshoe pattern of grouse feet. Emma absorbed each lesson eagerly, her natural intelligence and keen observational skills allowing her to quickly recognize and differentiate between various tracks. "You've got a good eye," Mike commented as Emma correctly identified a set of fox tracks without prompting. "Natural tracker." The rare praise warmed her despite the frigid temperature. Mike wasn't given to unnecessary compliments, which made his occasional recognition of her abilities all the more meaningful. As the short winter day began to wane, they turned back toward the cabin, following their own tracks through the deepening shadows of late afternoon. The forest was quiet around them, most wildlife sheltering after the storm, the only sound the soft crunch of their boots in the snow and the occasional distant crack of a branch releasing its burden of accumulated snow. "Mike," Emma said suddenly, breaking the companionable silence. "If my father is good, if he wants me to live with him, would I still be able to visit? To come back to the cabin sometimes?" Mike was quiet for several strides, his breath forming clouds in the cold air. "That would be your father's decision," he said finally, his voice carefully neutral. "But you'd always be welcome here, Emma. This cabin, it's your home too now, for as long as you want it to be." The simple statement, delivered without fanfare or excessive emotion, nonetheless represented a profound shift in their relationship, an acknowledgement that what had begun as a temporary emergency arrangement had evolved into something more significant, more lasting. Home. The word resonated in Emma's mind as they approached the cabin, its windows glowing with warm light against the gathering dusk. Not a temporary shelter, not another way station in a journey of constant displacement, but home. A place where she belonged, where her presence was valued, where stability and security weren't conditional on perfect behavior or someone else's convenience. Inside, they shed their snow-covered outer layers in the mudroom, the transition from biting cold to enveloping warmth creating a physical sensation that mirrored Emma's emotional state, the contrast between her past life of constant uncertainty and her present reality of steadfast care and belonging. The week passed in a blur of school, chores, and quiet evenings by the fire, but beneath the surface routine, tension mounted as Saturday, and Emma's meeting with her biological father, approached. Though she tried to maintain her usual composure, small signs betray her anxiety: restless sleep, picking at meals, unusual quietness. Mike observed these changes without comment, but responded in practical ways, ensuring her favorite foods appeared at meals, suggesting extra wilderness lessons to occupy her mind, leaving new books on her bedside table for nighttime distraction. His steady presence and unspoken understanding provided an anchor amid the emotional turbulence of anticipation and fear. On Friday night, as they sat before the fire after dinner, Mike finally addressed the situation directly. "Tomorrow will be difficult," he said, his tone matter-of-fact rather than pitying. "Meeting someone who is simultaneously a stranger and your closest blood relative. Having expectations on both sides. Navigating complex emotions." Emma nodded, grateful for his straightforward acknowledgement of the challenges ahead. "Remember two things," Mike continued. "First, you don't owe anyone an emotional response you don't genuinely feel. Not tears, not hugs, not immediate trust or affection. Authentic reactions, whatever they are the only sustainable foundation for any relationship worth having." The advice, so characteristic of Mike's no-nonsense approach to emotional matters, resonated with Emma's own instinctive guardedness. "Second," he added, "I'll be there the entire time. If at any point you want to leave, need a break, or just want backup, signal me. One tap on my arm means stay closer, 2 taps means I need a moment alone with you, 3 means I want to go home. No questions asked, no explanations needed." The careful planning, the respect for her autonomy coupled with the assurance of protection, nearly undid Emma's composure. No one in her life, not her mother in her better moments, certainly not Ray, had ever demonstrated such thoughtful consideration of her emotional needs while simultaneously empowering her with choice and agency. "Thank you," she managed, her voice slightly unsteady. Mike nodded once, accepting her gratitude without requiring further expression of emotion from either of them. Saturday dawned clear and cold, the world outside the cabin windows a dazzling expanse of white under a cobalt sky. Emma, dressed with unusual care in new jeans and a sweater Helen had helped her select at the general store, her movements deliberate as she prepared to meet the man who had contributed half her genetic makeup but remained a complete unknown. The drive to Riverdale passed in comfortable silence, both Emma and Mike lost in their own thoughts as the truck carefully navigated the recently plowed mountain road. Sheriff Miller had arranged for the meeting to take place at his home rather than the official setting of the sheriff's station, a thoughtful gesture that would provide both privacy and a more relaxed environment. James Miller's house proved to be a modest but welcoming 2-story at the edge of town, with a wraparound porch and smoke curling from the chimney against the winter chill. As Mike parked the truck in the driveway, Emma took a deep breath, steeling herself for the encounter ahead. "Ready?" Mike asked quietly. Emma nodded, though her racing heart and clenched hands belied her outward composure. Sheriff Miller met them at the door, his usual uniform replaced by casual weekend attire that somehow made him seem more approachable. "He's in the living room," he told Emma quietly. "Nervous as you are, I'd guess." The knowledge that her father, Daniel, was experiencing similar anxiety provided a strange comfort as Emma followed Sheriff Miller into a comfortably furnished room dominated by a stone fireplace not unlike the one in Mike's cabin. A man stood by the window, turning as they entered, and Emma experienced a moment of profound disorientation at the familiarity of his features. Daniel Parker was in his early 40s, with the same dark hair and green eyes Emma saw in her own reflection. He was taller than she had imagined, dressed in jeans and a button-down shirt that suggested he had also deliberated over his appearance for this meeting. His expression as he saw her was a complex mixture of wonder, recognition, and barely contained emotion. "Emma," he said softly, her name and his voice carrying a weight of history and missed opportunities. She nodded, unable to formulate a response that would adequately address the moment's significance. Behind her, she sensed rather than saw Mike positioning himself unobtrusively near the doorway, present but not interfering, exactly as he had promised. "You look so much like your mother," Daniel continued, his voice slightly unsteady. "But your expressions, the way you hold yourself, that's all you." The observation, specific and attentive rather than generic, suggested he was truly seeing her, not projecting an idealized image of a daughter he had lost and found. Slowly, with careful respect for the emotional complexity of the situation, they began the difficult work of reconstructing a relationship severed by time, distance, and the actions of adults long before Emma had any agency in her own story. Daniel shared photographs of her as a toddler, filling gaps in her memory with stories of her early years, providing a foundation of history she had never possessed. "Your mother wasn't always the way she was later," he explained gently. "When we met, when we had you, she was vibrant, creative, full of dreams. The addiction came later, gradually, after a car accident left her with chronic pain. By the time I recognized how serious it had become, how it was changing her, she was already planning to leave." The explanation, offered without bitterness or accusation, helped Emma contextualize her fragmentary memories of a mother who had alternated between periods of warmth and engagement and longer stretches of absence and neglect. "I tried to find you both," Daniel continued, his expression pained. "Hired investigators, followed every lead. But she was determined, and she was smart about covering her tracks. After 2 years, the investigators advised me that continuing would be throwing good money after bad. That I needed to accept that she didn't want to be found." He paused, emotion momentarily overcoming his composure. "If I had known what would happen, that she would pass away, that you would end up with Ray, I never would have stopped looking. Never." The regret in his voice was palpable, and Emma found herself in the unexpected position of offering reassurance to this stranger who was nonetheless her father. "You couldn't have known," she said quietly. "And I'm okay now." Her gaze flickered briefly to Mike, still maintaining his silent vigilance by the doorway, and Daniel followed the look with perceptive understanding. "Sheriff Miller explained your current living arrangement," he said carefully. "It sounds like Mr. Logan has provided stability during a very difficult transition." Emma nodded, suddenly protective of the unconventional relationship that had given her safety and respect when she most needed both. "Mike's been good to me," she said simply. "The cabin is." She hesitated, searching for words to express the significance of the mountain sanctuary, home. Daniel absorbed this, his expression thoughtful rather than dismissive. "I'm grateful to him," he said sincerely. "For being there when I couldn't be." The acknowledgement, free from jealousy or territorial posturing, suggested a maturity and emotional intelligence that allowed Emma to begin cautiously hoping that this man, her father, might indeed be someone worth knowing, worth allowing into her carefully guarded heart. The conversation continued, moving gradually from the difficult past to the present and potential future. Daniel shared details of his life in Seattle, his work as an architect, his marriage to Caroline, a pediatric nurse, their 2 children, Emma's half-siblings, Lily, age 4, and Ethan, just turning 2. "They know about you," he told her, showing photographs of 2 smiling children with his dark hair and eyes. "Caroline and I explained that you're their big sister, that we didn't know where you were for a long time, but now we've found you. They're excited to meet you, whenever you feel ready for that step." The existence of these young half-siblings, these children who shared her blood but had experienced none of the instability and loss that had defined her own childhood, created complicated emotions for Emma, a mixture of curiosity, tentative connection, and a wistfulness for what might have been had her own early years been similarly secure. As the morning stretched into afternoon, the initial tension gradually eased into a more comfortable, if still emotionally charged, interaction. Sheriff Miller provided lunch, and the conversation shifted to more immediate, practical matters: Emma's school, her interests, her friendship with Harper, her wilderness lessons with Mike. "You're thriving here," Daniel observed, watching her animated description of tracking animals after the recent snowstorm. "That's evident in everything you've shared today." The acknowledgement of her current stability, offered without immediate pressure to change or disrupt it, allowed Emma to relax further, to begin considering possibilities beyond the binary of staying permanently with Mike or leaving immediately with Daniel. "I want you to be part of my life," Daniel said finally, as the winter afternoon began to wane. "To know your siblings, to have the extended family that is your birthright. But I also recognize that you've established something valuable here, something healing after years of instability." He glanced at Mike, who had maintained his quiet presence throughout the day, offering support without intervention. "What would you think about a gradual transition? Regular visits in both directions, you coming to Seattle to spend time with us, me coming here to Montana. Building a relationship at a pace that feels right to you, that doesn't disrupt the stability you've found." The proposal, thoughtful and respectful of her needs rather than centered on adult convenience or legal technicalities, eased the knot of anxiety that had been building in Emma's chest at the prospect of immediate, wrenching change. "I think I'd like that," she said cautiously. "To get to know you, and Caroline, and the kids. But still have this." Her gesture encompassed not just the physical space but everything it represented: Mike, the cabin, the school, the community that had embraced her. Daniel nodded, understanding the significance of what she wasn't being asked to sacrifice. "We'll make it work," he promised. "However long it takes, whatever form it ultimately needs to take. You've had enough disruption and loss, Emma. This should be about adding to your life, not taking away the security you've found." As the meeting drew to a close, Daniel asked for a moment alone with Mike, a request Emma granted with only slight hesitation, curious but not fearful about what might pass between these two men who represented such different aspects of her past and potential future. From her position in Sheriff Miller's kitchen, she could see but not hear their conversation, Daniel speaking earnestly, Mike listening with his characteristic focused attention, responding in his usual economical manner. Whatever was said, both men seemed satisfied with the exchange, shaking hands with what appeared to be genuine mutual respect before rejoining Emma and Sheriff Miller. The drive back to the cabin was quiet, the winter darkness descending rapidly as they ascended the mountain road. Emma watched the lights of Riverdale recede behind them, her mind processing the events of the day, the revelations about her history, and the possibilities unfolding for her future. "He seems like a good man," Mike said finally, breaking the thoughtful silence. Emma nodded. "I think he is. The arrangement he suggested, gradual transitions, maintaining your connection here while building new relationships there, it's sensible. Respectful of what you need." Again, Emma noted the absence of any attempt to influence her decisions through emotional leverage. Mike was evaluating Daniel Parker's proposal purely on its merits for her well-being, setting aside whatever personal preferences or attachments he might have developed. "What did he say to you when you talked alone?" Emma asked. Mike was quiet for a moment, navigating a particularly sharp curve in the road before responding. "He thanked me for taking you in, for providing stability when you needed it most. Said he recognized the bond we've developed and didn't want to damage it. Asked if I'd be willing to remain part of your life even as you build a relationship with him and his family." "What did you say?" Emma pressed, when Mike didn't continue. "I said that decision was yours to make, not mine or his," Mike replied. "But that if you wanted me to remain involved in any capacity, I would be there." The simple commitment, delivered without drama or excessive sentiment, nonetheless represented a profound shift from the temporary, pragmatic arrangement that had begun their relationship. Mike was offering continuity, ongoing support, a permanent connection that transcended legal guardianship or physical proximity. "He also asked about my military service," Mike added, surprising Emma with this additional detail. "Said he recognized the signs of someone who'd seen combat, who'd brought those experiences home with them." Emma waited, sensing there was more to this exchange than Mike was initially revealing. He understood why the isolation up here might be necessary sometimes, Mike continued after a moment. But he also suggested that connections, to people, to community, are part of healing. That maybe having you here has been as beneficial for me as it's been for you. The insight, offered from one man to another rather than as part of the more emotionally fraught father-daughter reunion, struck Emma with its simple truth. The quiet, damaged soldier who had reluctantly opened his home to an abandoned child had been changed by the experience, just as she had. The cabin that had been a sanctuary from human connection had gradually become a home where books were shared, meals prepared together, skills taught and learned, mutual respect cultivated through daily interaction. As they crested the final ridge before the cabin came into view, its windows glowing with welcoming light against the winter darkness, Emma realized that whatever shape her future ultimately took, whether dividing time between Montana and Seattle, eventually moving permanently to live with her biological family, or some arrangement yet to be determined, this place and this man would remain a fundamental part of who she was becoming. The cabin was more than shelter, it was the site of her healing, her rediscovery of trust and security after years of chaos and neglect. Mike was more than a temporary guardian, he was the adult who had demonstrated through consistent action rather than empty words that she was worthy of respect, capable of learning and growing, deserving of protection and care without condition or expiration date. These gifts, stability, respect, unconditional support, would remain with her long after legal arrangements shifted, geographical distances increased, and the practical details of her living situation evolved. They had become part of her foundation, her internal compass, her understanding of what she deserved from those who claimed to care for her. As Mike parked the truck beside the cabin, the headlights briefly illuminating the snow-covered porch before going dark, Emma felt a profound sense of gratitude for the unlikely journey that had brought her to this place, this moment, this crossroads between past and future. "We're home," Mike said simply, the statement both an acknowledgement of their immediate return and a deeper truth about what they had built together in these months of shared existence. Home. Not a physical location but a state of being, of belonging, of safety. Not dependent on legal documents or blood relationships but on the daily choice to treat another human being with consistent kindness and unwavering respect. Emma nodded, the word echoing in her heart as they walked together toward the warm light of the cabin. Whatever tomorrow brought, visits to Seattle, getting to know siblings who shared her eyes and hair, building a relationship with the father she had believed lost forever, she would face it standing on the solid foundation this unlikely sanctuary had provided. The mountain winds might change, seasons turn, legal arrangements shift, but some things, once given and received with open hearts, could never be taken away. Security. Respect. The knowledge of one's own worth and capability. A place to belong. A person who remains steadfast when others leave. These were the gifts the abandoned girl had found in the soldier's cabin, gifts that would illuminate her path forward, regardless of where that path might lead. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell, so you don't miss any upload from us.